Hey, this is Grace from NFP Connect, and we are connecting communities. And I am here with Brad Webb, the CEO of Samaritans. How are you, Brad?
I'm fantastic, Grace, and even better because we're filming this on a Friday afternoon. And I must admit, I wake up on a Monday morning and think, gosh, there's a big week ahead. And then before you know it, it's Friday afternoon. So it's been a productive week, and
Yep.
I'm looking forward to finishing off with a nice chat with you.
Oh, nice. Thank you. So tell us a little bit about the Samaritans and what you do.
Okay, I'm the CEO of the Samaritans. We're a regional welfare agency and we operate in Newcastle, Lake Macquarie, Hunter, Central Coast, Mid-North Coast and Western regions of New South Wales. So we last financial year, supported around 33,000 people in total across over 100 services. And we looked after those people with about 800 staff and just over 380 volunteers. We're pretty diverse as an agency. We have services that support people with a disability, families, young people, children, and those who are experiencing homelessness, domestic violence, ill mental health, financial hardship. So a multi-service agency, and that's been one of the interesting aspects of responding to COVID-19. Because we're a large organisation, there's quite a few moving parts. So it's been a bit of an adventure for the last couple of months.
So with 800 staff, how did COVID affect you and your staff?
Yeah, look, it was fortuitous that we'd invested last year in unified comms. So we'd actually moved quite a lot of our technology into being enabled for remote working. That wasn't with anything in mind other than the fact that we were integrating our technology. We were getting rid of desk telephones, for example, and being able to use unified comms, voice over or IP type comms for our organisation. So we actually had a large amount of the technology set up that enabled us to move those people who could work from home into a home environment. Now, of course, we have many services that we can't deliver from home. We run residential services for people with disability. We have residential services for young people and youth supported accommodation and those types of things. So there are some services for which we need staff to be coming into the work environment and working from work. But then we had a whole range of other staff that we were able to think about how could we redesign their work and redesign the work they do and put them in a position to work from home.
And what was the impact on your clients?
What we had a lot of good advice from our people and culture team, and we established service response plans, a process that they put in place, which allowed us to develop a unique service response plan for each of those individual services we mentioned before. So there's over 100 plans in place that consider a range of factors. Do you need to deliver that service face-to-face? How can you, if you are delivering that service face-to-face, what modifications do you need to make to the working environment to make that safe for our staff and the people we support? Is this a service that the model of service delivery can be changed to being able to be delivered remotely? Can we deliver, say, for example, some of our therapy services? Could we move those into a telehealth, telepractice environment and deliver those via the computer? Other services, what functions could we deliver from a home office setup? So each of those services did this service response plan, looked at that through a risk and a safety lens, and then we started the transition of moving people into very quickly, actually, within a couple of weeks, we'd set those up and moved people into an environment. So a proportion of our staff remained delivering face-to-face services and a proportion moved to a working from home environment.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I know that Samaritans, had a really strong part to play with recovery and emergency relief around the fires. And then you back that up with COVID. How do you manage as a leader to support staff and what did the fires teach you, or what had you sort of learnt in the fires that you could use with regards to an emergency response for COVID?
Um, Slightly different scenarios, because the fire response required a quick mobilisation, particularly for us, of our volunteer disaster recovery workforce, and mobilising them and putting them into the field. Then they were there for a period of time, and then we withdrew them. COVID was slightly different in that we already had our workforce. What we were setting them up for was an indeterminate amount of time to be working in a new way. And the entry into COVID was punctuated by uncertainty, personal fears, as well as professional anxieties. A lot of those people were then thrown into an environment with their families who were also in similar situations, either working from home, or kids that couldn't go to school and they were having to school, or having carer responsibilities for parents or other family members. So there was this incredible whole of community happening around the staff that wasn't happening in the disaster recovery sense. So slightly different. But your question was, what had we learned? And I think it was, from the fires, you have to learn to be resilient and adaptable. And that's something that we then translated into a whole of organisation approach. How do we become resilient and adaptable? And I must say, I've just been completely blown away by how patiently and how in such a trusting way staff have adapted and moved to a new way of operating and thinking, and done so with a remarkable amount of good grace.
What was the hardest thing for you through this, as a leader, through this time?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know what was hard. I think the hardest parts are to come, really. I think when you're in a crisis mode, you just get on with it. So there's actually not a lot of time to think about, gosh, this is hard. It's just, you have to make decisions. You have to work through that process in a way. You sit uncomfortably sometimes with the speed of decision making, but you just, at the end of the day, there's a list of things on your table at the desk at the start of the day, and you just got to work through those quickly, efficiently, safely. So I didn't really have a lot of time to stop and think this was hard. It just was what it was. I tried to focus for myself on maintaining a degree of normalcy in the rest of my life. So trying to get out for exercise, to eat well, to still stay connected with family and friends, even if that was in a different way. So as a consequence, I don't really feel like this last period has been hard. I think all my team, they may beg to differ, but we've got to this point, and yes, we're tired, reflective. What did that all mean? But now we're thinking about what the future holds. What do we need to be doing as we ease restrictions and bring people back into the organisation? And I think that's hard. I think managing the expectations of people who are desperately keen to get back to working with each other and working in a way more like what they used to do than it is now. Yet we still have this virus that's circulating in our community that the only treatment for is social distancing. There is no cure, there's no vaccine, so it could flare up at any time. I think that's hard. Managing how we're going to continue to work in that environment will be the difficult thing.
Which leads into my next question. What have you learned or are learning through this process?
I'm actually, interestingly, learning to make quicker decisions. We didn't have the luxury of time to contemplate all the, to get to a point where you actually had a lot of information on the table and make a decision based on information. Sometimes you actually had to respond very quickly, respond to competing and unclear information from either government authorities or the uncertainty or unknown of COVID. So learning to make rapid decisions, to trust the teams around you in giving you advice around those that decision-making process in the lack of full and complete information. And I wasn't learning, I need to clarify, not learning to trust my teams, because I already did that, but learning to trust them in a different way and learning to work with them in a different way, making rapid rapid decisions that had tremendous consequences for the people who worked for us and the people that we support.
That's amazing. And I think that whole trust response has been really flowed through a lot of CEOs, Alambi and Lifeline, and where, that people have just showed up in such a strong way, and that trust of letting go as a leader. So are you naturally one to let go, or is there things that you've had to kind of let go of?
You'd have to ask my teams that. I'm naturally one to be interested. I empower people to make decisions, but I like to be aware of those and engage in that process and in that conversation. So I'm not a control freak, if that's what you're asking. I don't need to have complete control over the decisions, but I like to be aware of what's going on. And interestingly, we had been planning for COVID from late February, early March, and we'd convened a COVID-19 task force response team in the organisation. We were meeting every morning at 9 o'clock. So that was satisfying my need to be involved, to hear what was going on, and to give advice and contribute where I could. But then it was really stepping back and getting out of the way to let the teams get on with what needed to happen and what needed to be delivered.
So doing it early, like late February, that's quite early for a lot of organizations. Like a lot of organizations didn't really kick in until it was sort of, is that?
Yeah, I think I'd had insight into, I've got close connections into health in terms of what just with friends and former colleagues from previous roles who were talking about COVID-19.
Right.
And I think I was just reading a lot. We just knew that something was coming, and we had a chance. We just needed to be prepared. Now, we weren't contemplating wholesale transformation of the organisation and transfer of people to working from home late in February. That came later. But we were talking about things like, if there was to be an outbreak of infection in the community, how are we sitting for PPE, for example? How would we look after some of the more vulnerable people that we support? How are we readied in terms of infection control training and things like that? So they were preliminary conversations rather than a wholesale pandemic response plan, but we were certainly talking about it late February, early March.
Yeah. So have there been any programs or resources that you've discovered in this process?
Yeah, I think that, and look, I've got some disclosures to make because I sit on the New South Wales Council of Social Services, one of the peak bodies of social services in New South Wales, and I have close association with Anglicare Australia, our national peak body for organisations like Samaritans who are associated with the Anglican Diocese. But I really felt, for me, that the peak bodies stepped up and engaged their members in a way that crisis often drives, but was quite extraordinary. And because of the diversity of our services, we were working with National Disability Services, the NDS, who is the peak body for disability providers. We were working with the Association of Children's Welfare Agencies, ACWA, peak body for children's welfare. We were working with Anglicare Australia, as I said, with NCOS, and also local networks and connections. I really felt that we had federal and state governments making decisions and considering stimulus packages and contemplating how to provide supports to different parts of the community. The only way for organisations to truly have voice in that is to mass together, and I really felt the peak bodies. So for me, the engagement with the peak bodies, which is something we always do and also always have done with our advocacy, really stepped up a notch and proved to be incredibly valuable. We, for example, in the initial rollout of JobKeeper, it was available to NGO sector, but we still had to meet a 30% threshold. We lobbied for a reduction in to the 15% reduction threshold, then realised there were unique characteristics of multi-service agencies like ours, which meant that because of a proportion of government funding, there wasn't availability of JobKeeper. So we advocated fairly strongly through Anglicare Australia and with other agencies to see some changes made to that. our staff senior staff particularly, were very concerned about child protection issues, and domestic and family violence issues. So through NCOS and ACWA, we were able to advocate very strongly for conversations as a sector as to how we could adapt practice to keep children and families safe when they were in isolation and effectively locked out of most of the protective factors that sit around them, like going to school or family visits and those types of things. So I really felt the peak bodies stepped into this crisis pretty effectively, and really enjoyed working with them and working with other agencies in that. It did mean an inordinate amount of Zoom and Microsoft Teams meetings, and it felt like I was 10 or 12 hours in front of a computer all day, every day there for the first few weeks, but it yielded some positive results for us.
And you play a massive role in the advocacy around the not-for-profit, and especially housing and different things like that. How important is that in situations like this? I mean, you've just said, you helped bring it from 30% to 15%, but in a big picture, like, that's
massive. Two time horizons you need to look at in answering that question. The first is in the immediacy of the stimulus packages. So there's an incredible importance in getting the economy stimulated, keeping money moving through the system. It was very important for our sector to be at the table of government, talking about the needs of the sector, so that they were considered in that first round of stimulus monies, because the needs of the community, particularly in a time of downturn like this, they come to agencies like Samaritans. So we needed to make sure that we had a voice in that kind of short-term, immediate government response, and that we were there with other players, making sure that our needs were being considered alongside those of other industries and sectors like retail and hospitality and the like. In the longer term, I think what we have is a really unique opportunity to reconsider the way in which we deliver service, to reconsider the way in which communities interact and respond to each other. So to be in the discussions and in the planning for what a world looks like post-COVID is critically important as well. So being there to influence the immediate and short-term responses to COVID, but perhaps more importantly, to also be there and contributing to the discussion around what the world post-COVID looks like.
Yeah. What do you hope we've learned or have still to learn?
I've said this on quite a few occasions when people have asked a similar question, and it reflects back to the bushfires late last year and early this year, where we saw individual communities experience great vulnerability. And in that time, we saw people that had never encountered what it is to lose control of their lives and and all of the things that they the levers they have to keep control in their lives kind of disappeared. They'd lost homes, they'd lost jobs and livelihoods, community members, they'd lost family members. So that vulnerability we saw in the fires, I thought was going to be a unique time for our sector to help have a conversation in the community about vulnerability. Fast forward a couple of months, and then suddenly everybody is in that scenario. We saw lines outside Centrelink offices that we'd never hadn't seen for decades. We had people who were experiencing the fear of getting ill, the fear of seeing family members ill, the fear of losing jobs and being unemployed. And I think that what we have now is this really unique opportunity to have a conversation in the community, because suddenly people have now en masse experienced vulnerability and now have greater empathy for what it is to be vulnerable. And that reflected, that anecdotal nice comment there has actually been reflected in some research that was released by Essential Research this week. And they found that, not surprisingly, about 56% of people surveyed now have greater empathy towards healthcare and care workers. But interestingly, about 20%, 21, 23% have greater empathy to those with mental ill health, to those who are homeless and to those who are unemployed. That's extraordinary, because we've been working in this world for a few years now, fed by political manoeuvring of creating division in society, having the us and the them, always othering people. And suddenly we're now in an opportunity to have a conversation where the other became us and we became the other, and that false dichotomy is revealed for what it is. That is a false dichotomy, and we're actually all human beings in this human condition together, and as vulnerable as each other. So will that yield something? I hope so. I hope it means we can mobilize people to be really reflective about the choices that they make at the ballot box, and what it is that those, and this isn't a partisan comment, this isn't about left or right and Greens and Labor and Liberals, it's about being an active participant in the democratic process and actually really thinking about what do those votes mean for us. We've seen, I think, across the world, a renewed appreciation for the role that government should play in basic services like education, like health, like social services, and the investment that we need to make in those to keep our communities safe. So I think the time's ripe for a conversation about tax reform, wealth redistribution, public investment, perhaps even public investment in social and affordable housing, and considering it as core infrastructure. So in addition to roads, rails, bridges and the like, we actually think about the social infrastructure that we need. So they're the kind of dreams and hopes that are running around in my head. And I think this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to kind of reset, recalibrate the conversations we're having as a community, as a society.
And I think you're right. Like, I think we've just been brought to our knees and everyone's been put on a level playing field. And it's, you know, now that we're sort of still in a bubble. Like, I was talking to my friend in New Jersey and she's still locked down. They're right near New York, you know, but we get to go out and we get to do the things that we do here. So we're still in it. It's just that we're just trying to work out, and hopefully we have learned. That's my hope, but you know, we'll see in the next little while, I guess.
Yeah, well, I just think it requires continued leadership from the community in having those conversations. I think in Newcastle's case, I'm really impressed with the response of local government to creating conversations and bringing people together from really diverse backgrounds and sectors and parts of our community to have conversations about what it is we need to do to respond not only to the crisis, but also, and more importantly, to the recovery process. It's in those conversations with people who wouldn't normally come together that we might actually start to shift some of those conversations. Now, if that can be replicated, you know, in our state conversations, our national conversations, we might have a chance of moving something along here.
So tell us, you know, what are the blessings that have come out of this for you?
We had a senior management group gathering a few weeks ago, and we did a Microsoft Teams live event, and I hosted that, and then we had breakout rooms. It was all very funky and fun, and we had breakout rooms. And one of the conversations we were having with our senior managers was for them what have been some of the learnings, particularly around remote working and supervising distributed teams. Many of them, in fact, most of them commented on the fact that the availability of technology and the fact that people were kind of hungry for contact and connection actually led to some incredibly deep and rich conversations and connections within the team that weren't necessarily the ones they were having beforehand. I think that's really exciting to think that we've, it's taken a crisis like that to kind of jolt people into a new way of working together in a new reality. They say in the change management parlance, of course, that change requires a burning platform. So how about we throw an international pandemic into the mix and see how that stimulates change? And I think it's that's been one of the blessings for us is people in teams and across the organisation, and that's multi-layered teams. It's not just the immediate work team. It's peer colleagues, for example, like our senior management group or our community services managers coming together and supporting each other in a way they may not have before, because they were all in positions of crisis and crisis response. So nobody knew the answers necessarily. So they were looking to each other for support. So I think that's been one of the blessings, and I think that's been amplified in my own experiences in talking to peers in other agencies, to our funders, to our peak bodies, really honest and real conversations about how we're feeling, and particularly at a leadership level, some of the, waking up at 3 a.m. in the morning going, gosh, I hope that was the right decision, or oh, we've got to contemplate what things that we now need to do. That was really useful to be able to ring and talk to peers and know they're all in the same position, and there was no fear nor favour in that conversation. You could just get on. So I hope that's one of the things that we can carry through, is that Brené Brown talks about vulnerability, and I think we all saw ourselves in extreme positions of vulnerability, which has led to some really honest conversations and hopefully deeper relationships.
Do you have any advice or suggestions for leaders that might be struggling through this?
I think to certainly asking for help if you feel that you need help. There's such an incredible amount of resource that is out there, both through government agencies and through private agencies. I just think that asking for help from people you trust is really, really important, and not being afraid to ask for help, because I think you'll find that most people will respond with, you're right, I was terrified about that too, or actually I have no idea, let's find out together. So asking for help is really a key thing. Don't try and battle along alone, because you can be rest assured somebody will have a solution or be thinking the same thing as you are. This isn't advice for responding in the moment, but it really came home to me about the importance of the people that you put around you, and you choose to work for you. That process of not settling for second best, actually having the very best teams that you can in and around you, is really been driven home to me. I've just been so grateful and lucky to have such good people around me. So that's more of a, how do you be prepared for the next time around? And as I said, everyone, you just need to look after yourself. Your own health is critically important. So from the very basics of basic hygiene of washing your hands regularly, coughing into your elbow, through to the practicing of social distancing, but right through that into good eating, not drinking too much, exercising in whatever way that you can, finding a way to get downtime, whether that be meditation or prayer or music or whatever that is for yourself. It's really important to look after you, because if you as a leader drop, you then are carrying the burden of not only being unwell yourself, but all those around you not being able to respond. So, be kind to yourself and each other.
Thank you. Lastly, what are you most proud of?
Without a doubt, the teams that work at Samaritans, from the direct service teams in each of those 100+ services, through to the team that I had the privilege of working with in responding to the crisis on a daily basis. So, no, without doubt, the people in our organisation and how they trusted us, our leadership team, but also got on with doing what they do, and in most cases without any disruption to the continuity of service that they are providing to the people we support, because those people are amongst the most vulnerable in our community to a disruption like COVID. So to be able to continue to deliver service to that community, that's what I'm proud of. And that wasn't me, that was the teams around me.
That's so awesome. Thank you, Brad. Thank you so much for coming and talking to me this afternoon. I really appreciate it.
That's my pleasure. And Grace, thank you to you for creating these opportunities for people to have the conversations. I've enjoyed watching my peers and seeing what they had to say, many of whom I know and admire in their own right, but to hear those reflections that you've been able to elicit from people has been really, really wonderful.
Yeah, I'm super proud of it because I think it's something that I didn't expect to do, but it just came out of this, and I'm learning so much about each individual, but also, you know, the leadership and what it takes for people. Like, you don't just get to COVID. You don't just lead well because this has happened. There's been a whole bunch of things that have happened, you know, for you as a leader to get you to be able to cope with this and to do it well as your people below. And so I think it's just helping share that message for those, especially that might not have the support or the leadership that they need, that to help them see that they're doing a good job. And I think that's really important for us in our sector. Like, it's tough.
Yeah, and I think from small agency to large agency, our sector, particularly in this region, has some incredible people leading the sector, and I think we should be very grateful for truly talented, community-minded people heading up these organisations with such passion and integrity.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brad. It was so lovely to have you.
My pleasure, Grace, and thank you. We'll talk soon.
Okay, bye.
Bye.